Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In this section and the next we're going to take a look at the Excel web app. If you've used Excel services before, you may have a pretty good idea of what the Excel web app is about. But for those of you who don't or haven't used Excel services, let me just briefly explain. The Excel web app gives you a way of using a cut down version of Excel to effectively create, modify and use your workbooks online. So I'm going to try to explain what this is and how it works in a little bit of detail, and I'm going to explain it as usual using an example. If you've got a Microsoft account, you may have an old Hotmail account or a Microsoft Live account or a more modern Microsoft account. One of the facilities that you get with a Microsoft account is a SkyDrive account and some SkyDrive space. At the time of recording this, I think you get something like 7 gigabytes of free space with a Microsoft account. Now once you've got your free space on SkyDrive, if you log into your Microsoft account as I have here and then go to SkyDrive, the home area on SkyDrive is really like having an extension to your own PC or the device that you're using, in that you have storage space arranged into folders. And what I'm going to do, without using my desktop copy of Excel at all here, is to create an Excel workbook to do loan calculations. I've already created a folder called Loan Calculators. I don't know how familiar you are with SkyDrive, but the little number in the right hand corner of this folder tile here says 0, which means there are 0 files in that folder, so it's an empty folder. If I click on Loan Calculators, this folder is empty. If I want to now create a new document, I can pretty much do that in all sorts of ways. I can drag files to there, I can upload them and so on. But what I'm actually going to do is to create a new workbook. So that's pretty straightforward. On this bar here, I click on the drop down next to Create and choose Excel Workbook. Now I give the Excel workbook a name. I'm going to call it Loan Affordability. Click on Create. Now while that's creating the workbook, just one or two things I should point out. Quite a few things to tell you about the differences between this and Excel running on your desktop. One of them is that there is actually no save facility. There is a save as, but no save. The reason being that Excel web app automatically saves your work every couple of minutes. And the reason for this, of course, is that your internet connection may be broken at any time. So it's absolutely essential that the work that you're doing is saved very frequently. I should also point out, in case that's already raised a little alarm with you, that there is a limit to the size of the Excel workbooks that you can work on in the Excel web app. So you're not talking about huge workbooks that take ages to upload and download. You're talking about relatively small workbooks. The next thing to point out is that if you are using a touch device to do this, you can pretty much do everything with a touch device. I've actually used keyboard and mouse to get to this point, but I've also done this several times myself using an iPad actually, and getting into this and using all of the facilities of it is absolutely fine using a touch device. There is, in fact, here on the equivalent of the quick access toolbar in the top left hand corner here, the usual little switch. It works very slightly differently to the desktop version, but basically I'm in touch mode at the moment, so the buttons are pretty well spread out. If I click that, I go into mouse mode. Click it again, I'm back in touch mode. I'll keep it in touch mode, although I'm actually using the mouse because it's a little bit easier to see everything on this relatively small resolution screen. But it's absolutely fine to do this in touch mode. Now, the most obvious thing about this is that the layout is really quite similar to the desktop version, but you will notice you have a lot fewer tabs. You just have Home, Insert and View. And I'm going to quickly run through what's on those tabs in a moment, but just to the right of those there's a button there, Open in Excel, and that means that at any time when you're doing this, if you click on that, you will open your desktop copy of Excel, and the workbook will be downloaded to your desktop. You can work on it in your desktop, and then you can revert back to the web app, or you can close it or whatever. This is where people quite often get a little bit sort of confused and their eyes start to glaze over because they lose track of what's going on. But just above there is a reminder here of which workbook you're working on. And note, it's on SkyDrive. It's in my loan calculators folder, and it's called that. So there's no doubt that the location of the workbook I'm working on is in SkyDrive in my case. And of course, over on the left here, you have access to the web app equivalent of Backstage View. Again, you have a link to open in Excel, and you also have a link to previous versions of the same document. You can maintain previous versions on SkyDrive. I'm not going to go into that now, but that can sometimes be useful. Again, notice you've got a reduced number of options here. So you've got info, the one we're looking at the moment. You've got a save as, so you can save it as some other name. You can also save it onto your computer, so do it as a download. Note there the where's the save button. Click here to learn about saving, and that'll explain to you about the importance, necessity of frequent saving in Excel web app. Then you've got print, share, I'll talk about later, about, help and exit. So a considerably cut down Backstage View, but the principle of the Backstage View here is the same as it is in the desktop app. So let's now take a look at these tabs before we create our first workbook using the Excel web app. The Home tab has a reduced version of the main functions that you get in the desktop app. So you've got things like insert and delete, auto sum, you've got alignment facilities and so on. You don't get dialog box launchers. You do have contextual menus, although they tend to have less items on them. And as you would expect, if I say type some content in here, and this time I'm going to make a selection using touch. So having made that selection with touch, now tap and hold, and I bring up the equivalent contextual menu. Pretty much the same thing with touch. Obviously the options on the menu are spaced out more, but it's really a cut down version of the desktop app in terms of things like contextual menus. So let's take a look at the other tabs. The Insert tab we can use to insert functions. Now the insert function option here gives us a dialog equivalent of the one in the desktop version. You do have access to the regular functions, so you've got them categorized in the same way. So you've got things like statistical functions, and you've got your range of statistical functions. You also have the facility to insert charts. Note that there is no facility to insert pivot tables, pivot charts, but as with many other aspects of the Excel web app, there are some facilities such as pivot tables that may be in existing Excel workbooks, and if you open them in the Excel web app, it can actually cope with pivot tables. You just can't create them within the Excel web app itself. The View tab just gives you basically access to either going into editing view or reading view. As we'll see a little bit later on, when you give people permission to access this workbook, you can specify whether they can edit it or whether they can only read it. So that's the main facilities that are on the tabs, and I think it's fair to say that given that this is the first comprehensive version of the Excel web app, it's already got a lot in it in comparison with earlier attempts at putting Excel on the web. And just one other thing to point out before we start creating our workbook, you do get regular screen tips when you hover over certain things. So you've got a feedback button there, and you've also got access to help with the familiar question mark symbol in the right hand corner there. So let's set about creating this loan affordability calculator. And basically we're going to do one of the things that we did earlier on. We're going to use the correct function for it this time though. We're going to calculate how much money I can borrow for a given monthly payment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work within this current workbook. I can widen a column by dragging the header. Everything works pretty much the same. Depending on the speed of your internet connection, you may have to be a little bit more patient than usual, but it basically all works okay. So let's say that we're going to put in here the annual interest rate, and then we're going to have monthly payment, and then we're going to have number of months, and we're going to calculate the loan amount. Now we know what the formula is to use to do that calculation, but let's just put the numbers in, and I'll talk a little bit about using number formatting as an example of the differences between the Excel web app and the desktop app. So let's start with the annual interest rate. That's going to be 6%. In the number group on the home tab, there is a number format button, and the drop down there gives us the available number formats. One of those is percentage. So I'm applying that there, and I'm going to say the interest rate is 6%. Now, one thing to note here is that you don't have the same level of control over things like numbers of decimal places, but that doesn't mean to say that you don't have any control, because if you just go back into that particular field, in the number group there's a pair of buttons. There's that one, and note the screen says increase decimal, and that one that says decrease decimal. So if I press decrease decimal twice, I can express the annual interest rate as a whole number, as a percentage. Now let's suppose I say that I can afford a monthly payment of 200 of whatever my currency units are. My currency units here are pounds, so I'm just going to call that currency. And again, I can reduce the number of decimal places if I want to, but I won't. Let's say I'm going to borrow that over a period of 5 years, so that's 60 months. And here I'm going to say that's a number format. Again, I get 2 decimal places. I want to reduce that down to no decimal places. And now all I need in the loan amount is the correct formula. Now, although I'm using the Excel web app, if I start to type the formula, you may recall way back near the beginning of the course, it's the PV function that we need. So it's equals PV, and you do actually get pretty much the same help that you get in the desktop version. So if I open the round brackets, I'm prompted for the arguments that I need. The rate will be C2 divided by 12, that's the monthly interest. The number of periods is C4. The payment is C3. And then I'm going to say the final value will be nil. And then the type of payment, I'm going to choose payment type of 1. And then I can just hit the enter key. And there you are. I could borrow £10,396.84. So that's my loan affordability calculator. Not very long ago it would have been unthinkable that you could actually put that as a working workbook just on a website as it is. You've been able to do things like make workbooks work within SharePoint and under certain other circumstances for a while. But in terms of generally making a workbook available on a website, that really is a bit of a new innovation. So in the next section I'm going to show you how I put that affordability calculator into my website and make it available to anybody I want to use. Just one or two final points before we close this section. It's very important to recognize that what has been done here is to use Excel from within a web browser, and it's not necessary to have an installed copy of Excel. You don't need the desktop app to be able to do this. And in fact, I've done all of this several times for this type of functionality on an iPad, and there's certainly no installation of any Microsoft Office software on my iPad. So it gives you a massive amount of flexibility and freedom. it is true that it is still a little restricted, not only in terms of the fact that the functionality, if you look at it holistically, is only a relatively small part of the overall Excel functionality, but as you can see from what we've done there, an awful lot of it is included, and I think over the coming months and years it's going to grow and grow and grow. Okay, that's it for this section. In the next we'll look about making this workbook, this loan affordability workbook, available to the general world. That's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one.